Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Alex from TCG Discussions, and I'm coming at you with a PPG Invitational Top Cut breakdown analysis of a tournament that just happened this past weekend. I first off want to say a couple things. I got the analysis pie chart from Crossworld TCG, so full shout outs to Danny Palladino and Crossworld TCG for this. I highly recommend you go check out the video. I think he has a lot of great things to say about it. I'm going to kind of gear the top cut conversation a little bit differently. He kind of touches on some of the things that I will talk about in this video, but I'm going to go about making this video about it being why best of three to me is a more true representation of what this game needs in its tournament play versus best of one for our regionals and things like that. So getting into the top 16, we have 3 Red Brawly, 3 Dark Brawly, which ended up winning the tournament. I think 2 were in top 4, 2 Mecha Frieza, 2 Soul Striker, 2 Vegex, however you say it, 1 Invoker, 1 King Piccolo, 1 Reboot Gohan, and 1 Turles. So the first thing I want to say, what stands out to me is the 1 King Piccolo in the top 16 cut. King Piccolo has been on a best of one dominant streak for like the longest time, for about a good month and a half now. I say the longest time, but that's pretty much how long it's been dominating. And this best of 3 revealing that it has one top spot, and even though our meta from week to week has been shifting, this color's dying off a little bit because of these tech reasons, but it brings in a counter to this color, and then that counter is colored by the deck that was just, moved out a little bit due to the tech reasons. And so, there's just been a lot of kind of chaos. And, but King Piccolo has just been so dominating. I mean, I think that there was a tournament recently where the top 3 were all King Piccolos. And it's easily argued to be the best deck in the game. Everyone wants to say it's Dark Brawly, even though Dark Brawly just won this tournament, which it's his first one in 2 months, I think. So the thing that's really interesting about this is, one, the falling out of King Piccolo. I think that when you look at the fact that King Piccolo had a less representation in this, it speaks to a little bit of how best of one favors certain deck strategies over others. And that is a very, to me, bad thing for the game, because there are many arguments to be made that in a best of 3 post side, the matchup that might be bad for you then goes astronomically tips in your favor. And I think that that's what this tournament is producing the most. And my main argument for that is the fact that 3 Red Brawlies were in top 16. So what is this saying to us? Well, Red Brawly has been one of the most solved decks of the format. And it's no secret as to why. Meki Kabura is incredibly strong. Violent Rays stops the deck equally, which Red can play. Topo can stop the deck, which Red plays. Vegeta Unison of Fury puts the deck's attack on curve way slower than it wants to be. It's worse, its easiest win is Mecha, but against everything else, once the deck properly has a sideboard against it, Black has lots of answers, and Bardock the Tenacious in the Brainwash No More promo, Meki Kabura, right? Meki Kabura can be played for any archetype. Red already has enough tools against aggression. Topo, Violent Rays, Meki Kabura. So basically what I'm saying is you could side for at least 2 colors, 12 cards that could do something against it, although I wouldn't recommend it. Blue can also do Meki Kabura, Heroic Prospect Trunks. Baby has a little bit harder of a time getting to where it needs to get, but I think that it still can have the tools. Kai being a board wipe is a huge, it's played in a lot of top decks, but Kai being a board wipe can kind of in a lot of ways put Red Brawly in a tilt situation. During potential hitting the 1-drops, Frieza just popping the chain early before the leader can get awakened. hand control, which is a serious problem, right? If something happens to your chain, but you don't have a hand to replace it, there's lots of things that can just go wrong for Red Brawly. And its prominence in this top 16 cut shows me that while the deck is very easily solved with a lot of, good tech cards, Nimbus, so on and so forth for yellow, and providing, if Sin Shenron's blocker with Nimbus, for example, is one of the strongest, gates to Red Brawly, right? Simply because the 9-drop negating the swap skill, and then Nimbus just saying the aggression is going to be negated and stopped. You don't have a lot to do with it. So, but going on and kind of off that, the chain's going to be easily removed by the blocker anyway. So it's attack with what? There's lots of ways you can easily see that these colors have answers to it. And you'd also think that, that would also mean that this sideboard, right, could effectively hinder Red Brawly more. But that's just quite the issue, because people don't think about how the counter side for Red Brawly can equally be as strong, and bringing in the cards that help it while subbing out the more suboptimal cards in its strategy in the matchup to help it get over the hump and continue to create the pressure that it does. So Red Brawly, being a representative of three decks of this top 16 cut, are extremely important to what I'm going to talk about here in a bit. Moving on, we're going to Dark Brawly. Dark Brawly, thank God, it's about time. I've thought this deck is the strongest deck in the format for the longest. It has insane attack potential. Without the proper cards on board, you're always favored, right? So without Vegeta, Unison, and Fury for yellow, you're having a rough time. If you take your own life, like in Mecha, you're having a rough time. If you talk about Red Brawly, Uncontrollable Berserker, can just remove the chain before you get up the chain high enough, or even if you do, there's Protector of the People, so on and so forth. I thought that Red Brawly basically has a lot of tools against a lot of the top decks, especially King Piccolo, so on and so forth. But, Dark Brawly has also been one of those decks that's been somewhat solved. There's lots of key points, lots of ways to slow it down and then get your game online. And if your game online is stronger than presently what they can do, you win. And so I think that, Dark Brawly finally getting the top spots, I think that it truly deserves as a deck. And finally warranting the attention that it's been getting for some absurd reason. People have been talking about Dark Brawly as if it's the most unstoppable deck of the format. It's the best deck. It needs hit. Heartfelt Plea needs to go. All these other things. I think that that's just been toxic talk in a lot of ways. I think that people talking about Dark Brawly as if it's been not been what King Piccolo is doing. I always look at results, right? If the results of the tournament show this one deck has won 4 times and is now taking a top three of the top 4 slots, there's nothing to even discuss. That's obviously a dominant deck. And we'll get to the best one in a second. Mecha taking 2, it's to be expected. Mecha just has a lot of great tools against the entire floor. And I think that it also can side well against anything. There's lots of dominant strategies Mecha can play that can hinder other deck strategies. You've got the Slug package, you've got the Aegis package, giving you resource management back, giving you more options to play extra cards and play good tools. Vegeks taking 2 spots is kind of what I'm going to view as an anomaly. I'm going to kind of set this deck off to the side and come back to it a little bit later. Invoker being Invoker, it's just naturally going to have its 1 or 2 spots with really great players. Just because the reality is once Invoker gets its game going, it's one of the hardest decks to beat in the game, period. It just is. The Rival Seeker adding 2 extra cards back every single turn is, putting it this way. If Rival Seeker is adding cards to its hand that are dominantly either removing your cards or preventing a card from coming to the board that you need to win the game, and it can defend itself well, which I think it reasonably can almost all the time, while putting victory strike pressure on you or potentially burning you out, then obviously you have right there a very strong strategy that just can't be overcome. I remember playing against my friend Jay, who was playing Invoker, and Royal Condemnation at a point, just getting one or two of those back was just enough to just stop my turn, right? Like, I have to invest in this card, and it just gets really condemned at the bottom of the deck, and I don't have the resources I invested into getting that card out in the first place. So it's just really tough. And I think that Invoker can definitely have a tipping point in that regard. To talk a little bit about King Piccolo, I think King Piccolo has a lot of good matchups in game 1 and can really be hindered in games 2 and 3 by side. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Reboot Gohan. This is a deck that's worth talking about. Reboot Gohan takes a lot of decks out back and just kind of claps it. If you don't have the resources to slow it down immediately, you're sad. Mecha has Release Removal, which is an amazing tool against it because it basically just kills Reboot Gohan on the spot. But there's a lot of matchups, Dark Brawly included, where Teen Gohan, I think, this is something also that Danny Palladino says in his video. There's a lot of matchups like Dark Brawly, Red Brawly, King Piccolo. You can just feasibly say, right, without the energy or without the resources that you needed to see on your side, yikes, like, it's game. Like, Teen Gohan just can run you over very quickly. So I think that Reboot Teen Gohan is just really, really good. And I think that it allowing to have a side puts it further over the edge in a lot of ways, in a lot of matchups. 2 Soul Striker. I've been thinking for a while that Soul Striker eventually is going to rise to the top of blue leaders, just because resource management seems to be really big. Baby doesn't play anything but plays on your turn, which is kind of backwards because it requires it requires your opponent to do something versus you doing something. But Soul Striker allows you to do something on your turn, get some resources back, and then continue to do something on your opponent's turn, which I find is a much more fine and optimal way of play. Although Baby has Mofuba for one, right? It has the reduction of those really key good negates and counters against the meta. So I think that I just predicted, though, that a more of a mid-range leader that allows for resource management back for defense while promoting its offense is always going to eventually kind of power creep a purely defensive deck because it has the offensive tools it needs to put pressure on decks that either hurt their own life, like Mecha Frieza, for example, get some resources back, and then defend against whatever Mecha Frieza is going to throw out them the next turn. Instead of just saying, I'm going to only defend against what you're going to do this next turn, charging an energy, getting your advantage, and passing. So, no surprise there for Soul Striker. I also think it's been topping recently. So, it's also good to see, though, 2 spots taken in the top 16. Because, again, this means that the sideboard is probably very important. And 1 Turles, it's Turles. Turles is kind of like the rogue anomaly that's just really strong. I think that once Turles meets its answers, it just kind of dies. Like, if you Kai the board, it just kind of dies. If it Kami the board, it kind of dies. So, returning to Vegeks for a second. Vegeks is, in my opinion, now kind of a terrible deck. Here's why. It's not that the deck can't be played in a manner that's dominating or winning. So, for example, the Overwhelm variant that Anthony Hernandez played a few weeks ago, that was incredibly strong, but really risky in a lot of ways, because when you're overwhelming in Vegeks, you're throwing away your recycle condition, and it's just not apparent, right, that due to consistency of a deck that mills 5 cards, it's just not apparent to me that that seems like a salient strategy to be going with, because there's a huge inconsistency piece to Vegeks. The first is that you could just mill all of your good cards and see none of the self-play cards. That's one issue. The second issue is you draw the cards that need to play themselves, and that's problematic. The third is once you overwhelm, you have to be very cognizant of how often you're activating your leader's effects. And the third or fourth weakness, I think I'm on the fourth one. Fourth weakness is that it's very glaring, is that it is purely an offensive deck. And so its defensive capabilities are very, very, very low and way down there. So it's not apparent to me that Vejex is a great deck. It seems to be more of an anomaly to me that it did what it did here. A lot of people have been moving to the Ketapesla engine. Even the Ketapesla engine, though, you still run into the same problems. There's a consistency issue. You want to see all the good cards without seeing all of the self-play cards. If there's nothing worse than drawing for turn your Vegeta, having one already like on the board, and knowing that you had to maybe charge one or they've already removed one in your deck, right? Like, it's terrible. Then your next 5 mills are like maybe a Kai that plays herself, which is good, and then 4 other cards that would have been better than the Vegeta. So I think Vejex is not making a resurgence per se, that this is going to be a deck that increases in popularity. I think that it's just one of those decks. It has a lot of good tools in black, like with Bardock. Again, Bardock the Tenacious, Brainwash No More, Meki Kabura. Like, it can play these cards, and if you see these cards, Vejex seems like a very salient choice to pick, because you have free play on top of tapping your energy for these cards. And it can make a lot of sense, but again, there's a consistency piece of the deck that can be problematic. So on to the main conversation for a few minutes about best of 1 versus best of 3. I've played in both, right? My locals have supported both. I've played predominantly best of 3s my entire life. When my wife and I practice and play, I always do a best of 3. I never do a best of 1. And there is a lot of reasons for this. Number 1, it is terrible, terrible practice to say I'm going to play with only my main deck cards, because you have to, it denies you from understanding where your deck is weak. So for example, let's take Invoker. Invoker is a deck that has seen a lot of Cooler the Tyrannical Assault in its first iterations. Then the deck moved away from that to Instinctive Reprisal. You started seeing this in more popularity. I believe that a few deck profiles have been showcased on Crossroad TCG and in various other places. Lots of people talking about their Invoker decks individually on their own channels, right? But Instinctive Reprisal as an approach, as a temporarily, like a temporary tryout replacement for Cooler Tyrannical Assault, started to catch more fire for a number of reasons. One, there were just overall better odds of getting that kind of card effect to your hand due to the fact that it's a multicolor extra card. Number 2, Cooler Tyrannical Assault is dependent on your Beer Super Combo, and you have to choose when to get that play optimally online for yourself, and decide whether or not, when you do use your Beer Super Combo, are you going to use it for this Cooler Tyrannical Assault, or are you going to save it for an extra card later? Well, having Instinctive Reprisal solves that issue inherently outright. Number 3, and the most glaring weakness of the fact that Cooler Tyrannical Assault is Cooler Tyrannical Assault, is that it allows your opponent to attack you, right? Instinctive Reprisal does not allow the combo step to happen. It stops the attack. It addresses it, right? And whereas the attack is coming at you when you address it with Cooler, and it's also going to cost you 2 cards versus costing you 1. well, you're going to play the Cooler, but, you know, it's still 2 cards out of your hand, and your opponent sees the card, can deal with it, respond, whatever. And Cooler can be counterplayed, which is something else to talk about. But either way, point being, right, it doesn't seem immediately obvious that Instinctive Reprisal, which might have been a side card, right, versus the initial popular iterations, and this is also just has to do with proper testing in general, that Cooler needed to be removed from the main in order for Instinctive Reprisal for all the reasons I just listed. And when you do best of 3 and test for that and plan for that by using your side, you end up with a more refined deck strategy, a more understanding of what your key pieces are and needing to address the meta, and whether or not you need to make concessions at all for the meta in your main deck. So kind of what I mean by that is, when you are playing a game and you sit down from your opponent across the table, you should be looking at their deck. All right, so like let's say I sit down from Sin Shenron, and you should be immediately assessing all the ways their best cards interact with your deck, and then planning your play around that, right? So if I'm playing Dark Brawly and I sit across from a Sin Shenron, the first thing I'm thinking of is the 9-drop. What am I going to do about the 9-drop? Well, Uncontrollable Berserker takes that. Check. Move on. What am I going to do about their win con at Energy 6? Well, unfortunately, if they get there, there may not be a whole lot I can do. So maybe it's best if I don't let them get to turn 6. So does that look like then me taking my life with my leader? Am I going to try to awaken quicker so I can get more resource management from my warp back into my drop area so I can free play cards and sack them off? I might do that. Is it going to look like me playing out certain Dark Brawly cards first? Obviously, Uncontrollable Berserker is probably going to be the number one to take care of the 9-drop. But then there's an issue of it sticking on the board if they play another 9-drop, right? You know, am I going to need Rum Ravager to maybe take some of that hand away? How am I going to handle Haze Shenron? Am I going to shotgun on my leader? Yes, that's the only safe target. Because, quite simply, if you get to 6 energy, there may be just nothing you can do against Sin Shenron. And this is all before talking about whether or not they're playing the aggro variant or not, which can kill you as early as turn 2, turn 3. So, point being, though, you need to be sitting down and understanding what you're going to do against certain cards in your opponent's deck. And best of 1 says, I'm going to play a guessing game. I'm going to put these cards in that I think are going to be best against the field. Now, this is one of the reasons why Invoker is so strong in best of 1, because the reality is all of its cards are good against the field almost all the time. But the other aspect is, when you are attempting to play in a best of 1 format, you are taking a serious gamble by putting in tech pieces that may not be good overall against the field. Now, Meki Kabura is overall good against the field, so it may be one of those tech choices that's an anomaly in what I'm trying to say. But an example of this is Protector of the People, which is a card that I made deck a Dark Brawly. Oh, and Brainwash No More also kind of fits this category, so I guess this applies. Does nothing against Invoker. It just does nothing. So for those of you who think that Brainwash No More, Victory Strike, well, Victory Strike turns it off for a turn. So if they're coming at me and I don't have my negates, then it doesn't do anything. In Protector of the People, outside of being a negate for Victory Strike, which is good, that deck is not primarily attacking me anyway, unless it's trying to get my life down into a range where they can catastrophic blow me to death. So either way, right, and for the record, if they're not attacking me, the Victory Strike condition's live. If they are attacking me, both are live, and it's scary. And again, Protector of the People doesn't do anything really against that. Meanwhile, Invoker can play things like Topo. They can play Violent Rays. They can play, the Emperor's Death Beam, which just blows up a Brawly. Like, if I put any combo effort into the attack at all, it could just kill me. So there's lots of concessions that you have to make in other decks for best of one that like a deck like Invoker does not have to make, naturally favoring it over other decks because it already is going to do what it's going to do. And the thing is what it does is like nearly impossible in the game to stop. I mean, we don't have anything that really stops extra cards other than like counter. You stop counter cards, but even then, Invoker doesn't. The best counter cards in the game are played by blue and yellow. We've got the meta cooler that does something to that effect, and then the blue. But that's just about where it stops. It doesn't really. There's not really anything else in the game that's countering effectively, to my knowledge, and yeah, just really overall in terms of the field, I think that when you're considering like ways to interact with Invoker, it's not really going to happen. Like, I mean, like you can, if you're playing those colors, blue and yellow, yeah, you have your counters for like what? Royal Condemnation? Like, but you're not doing anything to, you know, you're not doing anything to Emperor's Death Beam. You're not doing anything to Catastrophic Blow. You can't interact with those cards. And the that's just about the end of it, right? Like you have these strategies that you can say, oh, well, I can counter it with this, I can counter it with this, but it's only exclusive to those two colors. That still leaves what? Black, that doesn't have a good counter. You've got red, that doesn't have a good counter, if any at all. And green, that doesn't. So there's three colors that you're just immediately throwing out the window in terms of really trying to affect what Invoker does against you. So one, best of one favors decks like Invoker. But two, it also favors dominant strategies. And this is another key piece of why King Piccolo didn't show up, is highly represented in its top cut as it has and does normally, right? Just looking at what the deck does, it goes extremely wide with barrier blockers and high tacking tambourine and all these other things. And the reality is if I stopped that turn in theory and played a Kami down and wiped your board, that's incredibly bad for King Piccolo, right? If I drop Kai and stop your turn and then I warp your board, that's incredibly bad for King Piccolo. And it's not as simple as seeing a deck like that run everyone over and just then say, oh, look, here we go. We have our undisputed new best deck, without taking the context of the best of one, right? Notice also, and I realized we had a ban list and the deck got hit, but notice that Cell Surge Victory Strike is not in any of the decks that I talked about. And this is something that I brought up a while ago in my video attempting to talk about Victory Strike, is that you have a serious problem after the side with the Cell Surge Victory deck. There are lots of cards that can stop that deck. There's lots of cards that can keep it in check. Mechikaburo can easily keep it in check. There's lots of cards that can just make your hand absolutely terrible. Sorry for the snoring, my dog's. She's falling asleep over here. But all in all, overall, what we have to do at the end of the day is recognize that there are certain decks that will crumble to the side, like just flat break and won't be able to do anything. Like if black sides in Bardock the Tenacious, what is that Victory Strike deck ever going to do? Nothing. Like literally nothing. You have to just immediately go into Victory Strike. And if they have any way to stop you whatsoever, that attack is done. And then if on the clapback, right, for Dark Brawly, which just removes the card, and for the record, I can point to this easily, right? So if Dark Brawly sides in Bardock the Tenacious and has its blocker on board, and then plays Bardock the Tenacious while the blocker's on board, that Victory Strike deck just stops. The entire turn is done. Then if I play Mechikaburo on my next turn, and then say, you can go into Hopa U7, or you can't go into Victory Strike, the deck stops. It's done. Or I think I just have to call 8 Son Goku, and both of them are addressed, including Height of Mastery. And then if I, again, on my next turn, play a Bardock the Tenacious with that blocker, the deck is stopped again. Do you see my problem here? Like, certain decks, just in best of 3, cannot abuse the fact that game 1, their opponent didn't have tech cards to help them win way more dominant of a very fragile strategy. So again, decks that are powerful with fragile strategies and weak points or weak curves, so on and so forth, get to be abusive in best of 1s simply because your opponent would not be normally playing the cards that would severely punish this type of strategy in a main deck, because it's not overall good. Like, it is not an overall good thing to have Bardock the Tenacious in your deck, and it's not obvious that it should be either. Yes, the Nimbus effect is good, but you have to seriously question, what are you committing to in this moment for this one energy, which is already super valuable in Dark Brawly, that you could have possibly played something better? Now, obviously, this again, it comes down to deck techs and choices, but this is what I'm talking about with best of 1s, forcing people to make concessions for certain cards that they may not normally play. So why best of 3? Well, best of 3 just, one, doesn't favor, like I said, fragile strategies. It doesn't promote certain decks and their strategies that could be very dominant game 1 that can be easily addressed game 2. So King Piccolo's strategy is not fragile by any sense of the means, right? There's lots of things that it can still do, even if you attempt to board wipe it and address it, so on, reestablishing its board, so on and so forth. But another thing to talk about, and this is very serious, is the die roll. Okay, winning the die roll may be the very end of your deck. For example, Red Brawly winning the die roll is extremely problematic because it enables its very high aggressive plays on turn 2. It can take its life to awaken, and it can do a lot with just 2 energy. And going into game 2, they're not going first, which naturally puts their attack tempo down an entire turn, even if their leader can swing at you, which again just doesn't even really matter. Secondly, going into game 3, and this is, so yeah, but what about game 3? Because they're going to go first again on game 3, right? Well, going into game 3, your side cards could prevent the aggression against your deck. And you may be able to actually do something about the deck's natural pressure from going first through your side. So, you know, when we talk about best of 3 formats, right, I think that is something that regionals and everything for the game needs to return to. The game is best played at best of 3 because a deck like Vegeks, for example, if it just mills terribly for the whole game, it doesn't have a chance, right? That's the luck of the deck. But if 2 out of the 3 games it can see its cards well, it can reasonably win those games, and good, right? It gives the deck more of an opportunity to play and play its strategy well. Same thing. Sometimes you lose games not because your deck is worse, but because you just didn't see the cards you need to see. Or maybe you bricked. But 2 more games can help solve what is already a consistent deck, right? It can sometimes stop that. I'm going to stop this video because my doggy's starting to snore. But I just wanted to make this video and, you know, kind of talk about where we're at with best of 3s and how best of 1s really are just not good for the game. They're not good in allowing the true fruition of what deck strategies can provide to a match. And I understand time constraints. People don't want to be doing things all day, all this other stuff. But again, I also don't want to make an excuse for that either, because it has allowed a deck like King Piccolo to just completely dominate for the last month and a half. And the minute you see a best of 3 format, King Piccolo has only one of top 16, And Dark Brawly wins for the first time in like 2 months. And Red Brawly makes a giant resurgence. So I mean, Vegex has more top spots than King Piccolo. Like, that's absurd. Like, that's like, if you would have told me like in a future tournament that in a best of one format, I definitely would have said there's no way that's happening. But in a best of three that would have happened, I still probably would have said, yeah, maybe, not really. So I think that we need to move into to an area of best of threes. I hope Bandai makes an official, like release that eventually happens. And we just move away from best of ones. I mean, best of one literally prevents Reboot Gohan from even addressing the meta. Because it's banned in best of ones. Like a whole deck strategy that took a top spot was, so a deck that could have been viable against our meta all along takes a top spot. Like, anyway. So, that's it for this video. Oh, and for the record, you could still have Reboot Gohan banned in best of one and still, for your locals and stuff, and still promote best of threes to allow it to have its place. So that's kind of like an argument for that. But that's it for the end of this video. Thank you for watching through. Let me know what you think about best of threes and best of ones down below. Apologize for my puppy snoring over here. And I will see you guys next time. And as always, this is Alex from TCG Discussions signing off. Later.